Iodo, at your service. In today's video, I'll be showing you why you should have a Bocksten style cloak. In my video about how to make a rectangle cloak, I said that that was one of my two favourite types of cloak. This is my other favourite type of cloak, and I'll be showing you why. First up, the history. Most fantasy cloaks don't really have much history behind them, and although that doesn't necessarily matter because fantasy is stuff that people have made up, it does make it feel slightly more real world if you at least base fantasy ideas off historic ones. And what I also find is that historic ideas tend to work very well because people have actually done them and used them and tested them over a large amount of time. This cloak, although it isn't a precise historic replica, because I've altered it to make it look a little bit more in keeping with a fantasy world, is based off a historic find called the Bocksten Man. It's a find in Sweden which radiocarbon dates to somewhere between 1290 and 1410, so it's reasonably well placed within the medieval and Renaissance time period. I'll link the Wikipedia article to it in the description because it's a very interesting find and it's well worth checking out if you're interested in this sort of stuff, because it's one of the most complete finds of clothing from that time period in the world, I think. The reconstruction of him looks kind of like a hobbit. I don't know whether that's one of the reasons why it's a very popular historic find to take inspiration from if you're doing this kind of thing. But it's kind of cool, isn't it? Also, Greg, a Middle-earth ranger, made this cloak style before me, and his is a much better historically accurate design than mine. I'll link his post in the description, I think you should check it out. Here is the pattern as it should be from the historic find. You'll notice that it's made up of multiple pieces of fabric because the historic find one will be made from a narrower strip of fabric because it will have been hand loomed. Whereas in the modern day and age, fabric comes in much wider pieces. So if you make this, you'll be able to make it out of one piece, so not that much sewing required. Depending on how tall you are, of course, because the cloak really does need to reach from your neck to at least your knees. If it's longer, it tends to get in the way. So if you're very tall, you might have to sew an extra bit on the ends just to make the semicircle longer. This is a pattern I use just in case you're interested. I made it more angular to be in keeping with the geometric dwarvish style, but it's basically the exact same thing. I've just noticed the camera isn't straight, so in case you're wondering why I'm stood sideways, that's why. So now I've told you about the history and about the pattern. Why do I like it so much? Firstly, because the pattern is simple. Not as simple, of course, as the rectangle cloak, but simple enough to make relatively easily with relatively low amount of sewing time. The only seam on the entire thing that's necessary is the seam here on the shoulder. I just sewed a border on it, mainly for looks really. Ooh, it started raining. Good thing I brought a cloak. The other reason, it makes for better coverage than a rectangle cloak because it's a complete semicircle. It hangs so that it covers much more of your clothing underneath. And it also means that when you lift your arm up, you don't pull the cloak away from you and end up getting more wet. Although this is my summer version of the Bocksten cloak, my winter version is much too heavy to wear at this time of year and too big to pack to take on holiday. Another reason it's good is because it's side opening. It works very well with a bag or a quiver strap, etc. Because if I put a bag over my shoulder, obviously it won't work with a rucksack, but it'll work with something slung over your side, then my arms are still free and it doesn't really get in the way of the cloak keeping me dry. And then I can put something on my back as well, and that works fine. And then if I get hot and I put it over my back, then it still works fine with the bag. And of course, again because it's a great big semicircle, there's exactly the same weight of fabric on my front as on my back, which means that it doesn't pull backwards like cosplay cloaks often do, so it's much more comfortable to wear. Also, a quick extra to mention, some of you who are being more observant might notice that my hood is actually underneath the cloak. Now this isn't typically how a hood is usually worn. Usually the mantle of the hood is over the top of the cloak, but I find that not only does that get in the way of throwing the cloak backwards over your shoulder like I have done now, because that would be kind of screwed up and causing a lump in the fabric, it also means that if it's a windy day, the mantle of the hood can blow up in your face, and it also means that the hood isn't very well anchored, so it can sort of slowly twist round, which is very annoying. And those of you who will also say that doesn't water run down the gap between the cloak neckline and the hood and make you wet underneath, strangely it doesn't really. I don't know whether that's just because wool is a high friction material and we've got wool on wool, so it makes quite a good seal, but I've never had that problem, and I've worn cloaks and hoods like this out on walks and hikes quite a lot really. Thank you all very much for watching. And thank you also to the new subscribers the channel has had in the recent few weeks. I hope this video has been interesting, and if there are any other types of cloak that you guys use that work well, please let me know about them in the comments and I might give them a try. I'll see you in the next video. And for now, I'll carry on my adventure.